the root cause of insulin resistance and how to fix it. The metabolism drives what we should do, not what's in the food. Insulin is the bad guy in the story, and insulin resistance is the cause of many chronic metabolic diseases, but insulin resistance is a form of insulin resistance. Insulin is the diabetes hormone, and it is a way to cover up the problem of mitochondrial dysfunction, which is the cause of all of these diseases that affect 75% of the population and cost 75% of today's healthcare dollars. Insulin takes glucose from the blood and fats from the blood as triglyceride and stuffs it in cells for a rainy day. Insulin makes the fat period a complete stop. When you eat something, your insulin-secreting cell tries to store the glucose for a rainy day. Still, if your mitochondria are dysfunctional, the insulin isn't doing an excellent job of it, and so the insulin levels have to go up. Insulin resistance is caused by liver fat. Fatty liver disease is now common in 45% of the U.S. population and 25% of children. It is the most significant pandemic, killing you in 15 to 20 years. The biggest pandemic is the liver storm or fat, caused by the mitochondria not working and the pancreas having to make too much insulin to make the liver do its job. The answer to this is dietary sugar. Just under 90 of the people who are watching this channel are subscribed. We're making headway, but still have a long way to go. There are a lot of moving pieces in this story. I want to make sure we stop and kind of recap where we're at. So we have the insulin resistance piece, we have the fatty liver, we have the mitochondrial dysfunction, and we're trying to get to the root of all this, which is the mitochondria. Radiation can cause mitochondrial dysfunction, and people who have worked on the space shuttle have inherent mitochondrial dysfunction because they are not protected by the Earth's atmosphere. Many things cause dysfunction in the mitochondria, including toxins in the environment, flame retardants, parabens, chlorpyrifos, glyphosate, insecticides, and particulate matter, all of which contribute to insulin resistance and other diseases of mitochondrial dysfunction. Sugar is the biggest problem. Let's take some time with each of these and get all the different pieces here to give people their best chance at mitochondrial health. Omega-3 fatty acids are the most critical and valuable fatty acids in your diet, and you can get them through dietary means or by supplementing. Omega-3s are heart-healthy, anti-inflammatory, and anti-Alzheimer's because they contribute to neural structure and function. Vegans can get one kind of omega-3 from vegetables. The other two are necessary for neural transmission and membrane stability. Omega-3s only come from marine life, and fish eat algae to make them. Vegans don't eat fish, so they need to supplement with fish oil, which still comes from fish that eat algae. Wild fish contain more omega-3 fatty acids than farm fish, and oleic acid, found in olive oil, is the endogenous ligand for a receptor in the liver called PAR-alpha peroxisome proliferation activated receptor alpha. This receptor helps the liver burn energy more efficiently. Olive oil is an excellent amino fatty acid, but if you heat it past its smoking point, you create a trans fatty acid, which is poison, so you have to be careful about olive oil. All unsaturated fatty acids are good, but polyunsaturated fatty acids are better because they can flip more double bonds and have a higher smoking point. Polyunsaturated fatty acids have been shown to cause immune problems. Saturated fatty acids are harmful to you, and saturated fat is animal fat, so if you get rid of saturated fat, you're getting rid of animals. There are two types of saturated fat, chain saturated fatty acids and chain saturated fatty acids. The abnormally chained saturated fatty acids are metabolized differently than the even-chained saturated fatty acids and have a different phospholipid signature. Medium-chain triglycerides are metabolized differently, absorbed differently, and go straight to the liver compared to saturated fat, so when your liver is presented with both saturated fat and medium-chain triglycerides, you can end up laying down more liver fat. Omega-6 fatty acids are found in seed oils and are pro-inflammatory. They are the precursors of the prostate sore of arachidonic acid and arachidonic acid, all pro-inflammatory cytokines. All you know is things that generate inflammation. Now, you need inflammation to get rid of the infection, but you don't want inflammation going on willy-nilly without an acute stimulus, And the more omega-6 you have, the more chronic inflammation, which isn't good for you. The devil incarnate trans fats are the reason for the 10-year-old Twinkie because bacteria can't digest them because they can't break the trans double bond, and guess what? Our mitochondria can't cleave that trans double bond either. Trans fat sits in your liver and never comes out, ultimately leading to fatty liver and cardiovascular disease. We are getting way too many of the wrong fats. The FDA finally woke up and banned trans fats in the food supply, but the food industry was pushing for them, and the answer to that was that if you put trans fats in the food, with no depreciation, you can increase that sell-by date to 3 years later. Dr. Fred Kummerow published the first paper on the toxicity of trans fats in 1957, and he died not too long ago at age 101. The FDA didn't do anything for 25 years, until 2006, when they put the number of trans fats on the nutrition facts label, and then in 2013, they banned them from ultra-processed foods. So, trans fats are disappearing from the American food supply. The FDA allows food manufacturers to round down the amount of trans fat on the label, so if you eat Hostess cupcakes, you have enough trans fat to kill you. There are no other sources of trans fat, so people should be fine if they avoid those. I think we can ignore the inherent trans fat in natural food and focus on just what the industry does to sell their products, and that's what the FDA is worried about. Let's stick to that milk piece, because this is a significant, exciting fact about saturated fat. Some people are intolerant to lactose, and some people are intolerant to specific milk proteins, so stay away from milk. If you still have it, you should try lactate and avoid gluten. Lactose intolerance and milk protein allergy are probably about 20% of the population, and African Americans and Jews have an increased risk of lactose intolerance. However, the calcium story is a bit messy, and we are given vitamin D, too, right? Giving milk to people with osteoporosis doesn't seem to benefit them because the calcium in milk is mostly unabsorbable. After all, the phosphorus in milk binds the calcium and makes it unavailable for absorption. The notion that you can reverse osteoporosis by drinking milk is a typical urban myth. Calcium and vitamin D do not work together to build bone. As a pediatric endocrinologist, I cared for multiple children with hypocalcemia and low serum calcium levels. I had to boost their serum calcium levels by giving them calcium and ensuring that it was absorbed, so I took away the milk. I gave them calcium without phosphorus and gave them calcium supplementation. This notion that milk is essential because it has calcium is not correct. In addition, milk does not have vitamin D until or unless you irradiate it. Finally, let me address one last myth about milk. If you determine causation, multivariate correlations are not the same as univariate correlations, and there's also reverse causation, where people with cancer might have altered food intake, or there might be intermediate causation. Yes, ice cream consumption correlates with drownings, but that has nothing to do with any causation, and no data suggests that drinking milk increases aristocrification. The China study seems to have a lot of legs, but because of the variables and the way it was done, there's no data we can take from it. Multiple scientists have derided nutrition as being the dark arts of medicine. We've beaten calcium and milk to it here. Let's go there for a minute, 3 words, and they get equated frequently. Food science, nutrition, and metabolic health are all related, but the only one we care about is metabolic health. Nutrition can only inform metabolic health. It's one step divorced from it because it's only what's in the blood, not what's in the cell, and food science is 2 steps divorced from metabolic health, so ultimately, the science of what goes on inside the cell matters. You mentioned wanting to leave milk, but you said something about calcium supplements clogging up the blood vessels. Some people take calcium supplements, but they're ineffective and can be detrimental in certain patients if they don't clear the calcium. Some people need them, but others don't, and they have been checked for hypoparathyroidism but don't seem to have one. The other piece that ties into that is K2, which helps the calcium go to the right area in the body. Okay, before we pull out fats, I want to ensure we address EPA, DHA, and polyunsaturated fats. When it comes to omega-3s, We don't consider omega-3s the same as omega-9s, and somebody who isn't vegan needs to convert or go back to the algae source and get that from that. Algal oil is a source of DHA, essential for neuronal structure, but it is not a source of EPA, which is necessary for neurotransmission. DHA is pretty clean, so adding DHA to stuff is easy. It is easy to add algal oil to things. Still, EPA is another story because EPA carries that fishy smell along with it. So if you're going to take the algae and develop this clean EPA, they've removed the EPA for that reason. Now that we're on that vegan topic, let's relate it to mitochondria and metabolic health. Omega-3s are essential for mitochondrial health. Two things that are low in a vegan diet are an issue: tryptophan and methionine. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin, the contentment happiness neurotransmitter, and methionine is a primary source of methyl groups necessary to methylate proteins and create glutathione, an antioxidant. If you're methionine deficient, you're going to be glutathione deficient, which means your liver will have decreased oxidative capacity, which is not good, and that's a great way to damage your liver, too. So, can we get enough omega-3s from fish as somebody eating meat? When you say eating a little bit of fish once a week, it depends on where you go for your fish, and if it's farmed fish, no. If it's wild fish, probably yes. We'll get to sugar, but first, let's talk about radiation. The higher up you live, the more ionizing radiation you're exposed to, but the lower the oxygen tension, the higher the mitochondrial biogenesis, which is one of the reasons why people in Switzerland who eat a German diet have half the incidence of heart disease and diabetes. The state of Colorado always has the lowest obesity because they have an outdoor culture, and the highest altitude gives you the most mitochondria, which is why every football team that goes to Denver loses there. Air pollution is a big problem in big cities, and an air filter will help, but you need to be outside, too, because particulate matter 2.5 is particularly pro-inflammatory. People living closer to freeways have a much higher incidence of diabetes and heart disease. Now, people who live close to freeways also tend to have lower socioeconomic status than they have other potential reasons why they might have an increased risk of diabetes and heart disease, but these studies are so complicated. Glucose activates two enzymes that improve mitochondrial function, AMP kinase and adenosine monophosphate kinase. AMP signals to the cell that it needs to generate more energy. The AMP fits in the active site of the enzyme. It induces signals that increase mitochondrial biogenesis and also increases another enzyme called hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase, which helps break the fatty acids into two carbon fragments so they can be oxidized. Fructose inhibits three enzymes necessary for adequate mitochondrial functioning. The first enzyme inhibited is AMP kinase because a metabolite of fructose called methylglyoxyl MgO binds right in that active site and forms a covalent bond with arginine. Fructose inhibits several enzymes in the mitochondria, including academic L-acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary for cutting up the two carbon fragments. It indirectly increases uric acid, which inhibits an enzyme that chaperones fatty acids into the mitochondria for oxidation. Glucose is a winner. When looking at fructose, it's a loser. Sugar is both, and which one wins out the fructose because it's killing those enzymes? You just mentioned something there. I want to highlight that sugar table sugar sucrose is both together. Alpha-1,4-glucosidase breaks the amylose starch up into glucose, but it can only break the amylase on the ends, so you generate one more glucose every time the enzyme works. Amylose has a lower glycemic index than glucose because it needs alpha-1,4-glucosidase, and some people don't have that much alpha-wound for glucosidase. When people eat foods high in amylose, like beans, lentils, and legumes, their bodies can't cleave the sugar, which means that the bacteria in their microbiome will chew it up for their purposes, which can result in increased carbon dioxide and sometimes hydrogen sulfide. In fruit, we see both amylose and amylopectate, but in grains, we see only glucose, and amylopectate can be arranged in two forms. One glucose can go this direction and down this direction, so you end up with a tree with multiple branches that almost look like a globule. Because of that, you can liberate glucose much more rapidly and get a higher glycemic excursion in your blood. Fiber reduces the absorption rate of both amylose and amylopectin, so you end up with a lower glycemic excursion thread that is much more critical now, and all-natural food is a low glycemic load food. The glucose spikes will decrease, and your body can handle things better. Feed your gut. The bacteria in the intestine can chew up fiber for their purposes and turn that fiber into a secondary product called the short-chain fatty acids SOFAs. These short-chain fatty acids affect us and keep inflammation down, which is one of the primary sources of chronic metabolic disease. A man named William Stevenson the Lemur Stephenson was born in North Dakota to Icelandic parents, didn't speak English until he was 17, went to Harvard, and eventually went to the Arctic where he was shipwrecked amongst the Inuit and recognized that the Inuit had no diabetes, heart disease, or cancer. William Stevenson was an explorer who trained the ski troops during World War II to the Bronner Pass and wrote many books. He also lived in a metabolic ward at NYU Bellevue for a year, ate only meat, and was perfectly healthy. Many tribes consume only meat and milk and are fine. You can also get enough out of a carnivore diet to maintain health, but you must eat the requisite fiber. There are different ways to do it when somebody is consuming only meat. Still, the one diet that never works is the standard American diet because it makes the gut bacteria want to grow up and feed on you, so if you don't feed your gut bacteria, they will feed on you. The second barrier is the biochemical barrier, called tight junctions. And the thing that can poison those tight junctions is wheat gluten in gluten-allergic people. A high-fat diet and low-carbohydrate diet restores the function of the pyrus patches and the Th17 cells in the gut, and a regular whole foods diet restores the part of the Th17 cells. The barrier is intact and keeps all the junk out, but when you add sugar to fat, the wall is breached, the Th17 cells are missing, the IL-17 is way down, and fat starts conglomerating on the other side and getting into the bloodstream, which can cause inflammation. As we come up on time here, let's ensure we get efficient and tie everything together for people. We know that fructose is a big part of this problem, and you're not the only part, but it's the part we could fix tomorrow, okay? When you look at a label, you have to look at the degree of processing, and the more added sugar it has, the more you don't want to eat. The goal is to keep your consumption of added sugars below 25 grams a day. If you eat whole food, you have nothing to worry about because the fructose content beyond fruit is minimal, and you won't absorb it because of the fiber, so the goal is to eat as unprocessed a diet as possible. A pescatarian diet is the best diet for health. I think it's the one I would choose if I could get it, and you want to eat primarily vegetables, fun, fabulous, perfect. Add a little fish to get your omega-3s, tryptophan, and methionine. When we think of fructose as a problem, we believe it is out of its whole food form. Still, when we process things in our kitchen through juicing, blending, and pulverizing, we're no longer talking about it from this perspective of having that safety net of fiber. Every label is a warning label. You have to look at the label to determine how much of a warning it is. There are ways to figure it out, and they're in my book, Metabolical, and on the internet. When it comes to the mitochondria and working its way down, the best way to keep insulin down is to avoid refined carbohydrates and sugar, the primary components of processed food. Rob enjoys the conversation. We link up your books, social media, website, and everything in the show notes, and thank you for your work. We need everybody on board, it's a big nut, and everybody must speak with one voice.